All right, Superhumans, we're delving into the world of movement today. And like always on the Decoding Superhuman podcast, we're going to go into this from a very scientific approach. My guest today is an expert in the field of high-intensity interval training. And if you've heard of HIIT, or if you said another way, haven't heard of HIIT, well, maybe you haven't read a newspaper in the past couple of years. But my guest today is Dr. Paul Laursen, and he resides at the nexus between exercise performance research, theory, and application. He is an adjunct professor of exercise physiology at AUT University in New Zealand, where he leads research into low-carb diet and its performance applications. Dr. Laursen has published over 130 peer-reviewed papers and is a co-founder of HIIT Science, which serves both to teach the science and application of high-intensity interval training, but also provides education online courses. He coaches a select number of elite triathletes, including Kyle Buckingham, and is the inventor of the Flow Bottle, which enables ice slushy delivery for hot racing conditions. So what are the highlights of this episode? Well, I'm super excited to talk about high-intensity interval training because I think there's a lot that comes from this general world which gets muffled up into a ball and spit to us and not really presented very well or with any sort of scientific rigor. And so with Dr. Laursen, we got into aerobic oxidative, anaerobic glycolic or lactate, as well as the neuromuscular and musculoskeletal systems. We talk about how the concept of no pain, no gain is actually quite stupid, and we get into the 5 HIIT weapons. The show notes for this one are decodingsuperhuman.com/HIIT, that's HIIT, and enjoy my episode with Dr. Paul Laursen. All right, so you guys are probably wondering, what are the brands of blue light blockers that I recommend? Well, one of them is the sponsor for today's podcast, and they are BlueBlox. I've had the CEO, Andy Mant, on the show before where we got into a really deep dive on blue light. And you know that if you get any amount of blue light in your glasses, no matter if it's 3%, 10%, whatever, it does disrupt melatonin production. And so Andy has created blue light blockers that hold up to the highest standards. And in fact, and I'll link to it in the show notes, you can see when he's tested it versus other brands that they always come out on top. And so quality is a thing I appreciate and is what exactly I recommend for all of our clients. But if you head over to blueblox.com, that's BLUBLOX.com, and plug in the code DS15, you're going to get 15% off. And now, on with the show. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Boomer. Thanks for having me on.
This is going to be an absolute pleasure because, high intensity interval training is something that I have a decent amount of experience with in the CrossFit realm, at least. But I want to dispel a lot of rumors today, and so it's an honor to have you here.
Thanks, man. We'll see what we can do.
And so we were introduced through Jason Moore, who's been on the podcast, and immediately I gravitated towards a lot of the work that you do. But I want to just start at sort of a high level in terms of what exactly is known about high intensity interval training, or maybe first just defining high intensity interval training for the audience.
That's a great place to start, actually, because like high intensity interval training for itself, or HIIT training, it gets kind of this mixed up messaging and definitions throughout. So look, I do, as a little bit of background, I'm a sports scientist professor. So, I'm kind of studying it right at the coal face of the science, and the scientific definition of high intensity interval training is exercise that is performed at a sustained rate, but above your so-called threshold or anaerobic threshold. Now that's an exercise intensity that's perceived as hard or greater. And I guess by definition, it is unsustainable if you were to pick any of those intensities above threshold. It's unsustainable, and you need to take these pauses between it to separate it. So if you're not, high intensity training, I guess by definition is a little bit more sustained high intensity work.
Yeah.
But the HIIT training itself is separated by pauses or breaks, and those pauses or breaks allow you to, I guess, perform more work. If you were to just try to maintain that same intensity indefinitely, you get more out of a HIIT session, more signaling, more bang for buck, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, what do we know about this? Because when you and I were exchanging emails beforehand, I'd love to talk about kind of physiological targets here, because there are, there's a lot that I've seen in the research about high intensity interval training, but since you're in the research and performing research, I would love to hear, what do we actually know?
Sure. So this is, I guess there's lots of ways we can look at this, but and there's many different physiological functions, in almost, for argument's sake, an infinite amount. But we try to take things and make them as simple as possible. And we break our physiological targets that you get with HIIT into just three main categories to keep it as simple as we can. So the first of those categories, that you aerobic stimulus, all right, you are targeting, although it seems like it might be anaerobic, you definitely get an aerobic stimulus, with most HIIT type of sessions, if there is some level of prolongedness or duration to it. All right. So when we're talking about an aerobic stimulus, we mean, our heart is, or our cardiac output, the blood that's pumped by the heart in a given minute, say, for example, it is near maximal. And that is a great stimulus that you want to get to, I guess, maintain kind of, longevity and whatnot throughout your life. There's a desaturation, a lowering of the oxygen level that's within the muscles. And this is a beautiful signal as well for making more mitochondria in the future. Okay, so that's the aerobic stimulus. That's the aerobic target. That's just a few of the highlights.
And Paul, on the aerobic target, and just for everybody out there, is 20 minutes the threshold? Because for whatever reason, growing up, we were always told like 20 minutes is the aerobic threshold. Or is there a particular time in general?
Yeah, I think that is really out the window. Like, that's an old school kind of
exactly
ballpark sort of thing. Like, we want to be, it's a Superhuman podcast, right? We want to be more.
20 minutes seems a little ridiculous.
It is, but here's the cool thing about HIIT though, is that you can actually get a lot of bang for buck in that 20 minutes, but like the 20-minute aerobic, steady state exercise, even a 20-minute walk is pretty average. It's not superhuman. We want to, but if you take that a 20 minutes period that you might have, and you break that into sprint interval training, say, for example, where you're going 20 seconds all out and then pausing for 2 minutes, say, for example, 20 minutes all out, pausing for 2 minutes. Believe it or not, your aerobic system starts to turn on, because it's turning on to kind of recover. And you're actually gonna, the studies have shown you get more bang for buck in that 20 minutes if it's done aerobic versus, if it's done in the sprint interval training format that I just described, versus if it were to be, just steady state, low intensity exercise for that 20 minutes. So, yeah.
And I interrupted you there. You were going to go on to something else after aerobic.
Yeah. So that was just the first, target, was the aerobic system. Second target, we often want to work on, and again, my context, I train, a lot of elite athletes, and I am in the business, based on my background of trying to optimize sport performance across different sports. And one of the targets, again, that we hit is the anaerobic or the lactic system, right? You'll know that burning in the legs and whatnot. So that is the second target, is your anaerobic lactic system. We can further develop that system too. So that's the second target that we get when we do a HIIT exercise. Most of us that have done it are familiar with that. And then the last one, and very important one, is the musculoskeletal and neuromuscular stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this would be analogous to the soreness that you feel in days after, or almost the weakness, or you'd feel like the legs are kind of shaking,
Mm-hmm.
in these kind of things. So that is an aspect of HIIT as well. And where we come at things with HIIT science is that we can manipulate our HIIT training to have various degrees of any of those three systems. That's the real cool and versatile thing about understanding high intensity interval training when you're in the context of trying to optimize the performance for an athlete or any individual for that matter. Knowing the degree of those three that you're hitting for any HIIT session that you might put in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know we're going to get into best practices in a little bit here, but let's say, because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, high intensity interval training can be beneficial for almost everyone. Looking at different ways to just actually look at structuring these workouts, is there best practices for, let's say, a power lifter versus, let's say, weekend Ironman athlete? What would, if you can give some sample workouts even, that would be good, like short ones.
For sure. So a power lifter, I'm not sure, if how much aerobic stimulus that a power lifter would actually need. So I would be having what I would call type 4 and probably type 5 sessions. So almost the sprint interval one that I just described there before, like a 20-second all out max, and followed by longer kind of recoveries, because that type of session would be targeting both the anaerobic lactic system and the neuromuscular system, right, in the legs. And then if we take the endurance athlete on the other side of the spectrum, they would be doing intervals that would be, more longer intervals and shorter intervals that are just down a tad on the intensity, right? So they're not all out anymore. But they're still at an intensity that's above that threshold. So they're hard or greater. But then there's that pause. So let's take like a short interval. A short interval session for a triathlete, say for example, is awesome. Let's take imagine the bike. Imagine you're on the bike and you are you're doing like 30 seconds on and 30 seconds off in a series of about 7 of those, say for example, and you're pacing yourself kind of accordingly in your brain to hit all of those 7s in the series, and 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off for 7, and then pause. You might pause for say 2 to 4 minutes, and then repeat that again. So that would be in an experienced Ironman triathlete, that would be a fantastic set for targeting those fast twitch muscle fibers, making them more oxidative, hitting the cardiac outputs. So you got good aerobic and anaerobic stimulus in it. If we move that same 30 on 30 off session down into the run, now you might recognize, again, putting yourself there and you're running, it's a little bit different than the bike, Boomer, because I know you're doing the triathlons these days, and you're experimenting with them. How with the running, you're getting more of that muscle damage that's a kind of occurring. So now you've added that neuromuscular component into it. And so you need to program those appropriately with rest on the other side of them. So those are those are two kind of examples. One's more of the aerobic; it's a little bit lighter, I guess, kind of common sense there. And then your powerlifter one, a little bit more all out to target the anaerobic and the neuromuscular system.
So in the case of the powerlifter, I guess in the case of both of them, is the work to rest ratio sort of the variable we should be focusing on, or is it that just too elementary way of looking at it?
Yeah, I know, like the work to rest ratio is used. I like to kind of use absolute, because I really think in terms of time durations. Maybe work to rest ratio could be a simple model to get your head around, but unfortunately physiology doesn't necessarily work that well. So I just like, if you want to maximize your anaerobic system, like let's just take the power lifter, you want time for the system to kind of become more balanced again and rested, so that you can wham and hit that again. If you're going to have short periods of time between your work bouts, then you're going to stimulate the aerobic system. So if you're the power lifter, ideally you want long pauses between your all-out efforts. Okay, because then you're allowing the whole body to kind of become fully recovered, and then you hit it again. You hit the neuromuscular and the anaerobic glycolytic system again. And now take the opposite end of the spectrum with the endurance athlete. Now we want shorter pauses, right? So yeah, you could have the work to rest ratios. I guess it's narrowed in that sort of situation. But I want, I might, depending on the system, but I might want only, between 30 seconds and 2 minutes or 3 minutes kind of recovery between my work bouts, depending on whether I'm doing short intervals or long intervals. But in doing those shorter recovery bouts between, you're targeting more the aerobic system with oxygen, right? That's going to be more important for the longer, endurance efforts.
So one question before we move on to dispelling some myths, just because I have a guy like you on the show, I have to ask this. Are there any of these systems that we can completely neglect and still physically and mentally perform at our best? Meaning, like, could you just lift weights the rest of your life and not do any sort of, I guess, high intensity interval training, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, you sure can, but it's like whether that's in the context of being superhuman, I don't think that's and again, no one knows everything, but I think you want to try to be, longevity is got to be key.
Yeah.
And to me, if we're just going to be lifting weights, we're still going to be, we're going to be maximizing our type 2 fiber engagement, which is what we want to do, right? We don't want to, a lot of us in today we're sitting a lot, and we want to engage those type 2, the larger fast twitch motor units they're going to sleep on us since we've been kids, right? We want to re-engage those so that we don't lose them, and we prevent falls, and we strengthen our bones and muscles and all those sorts of things. So weightlifting is awesome for that. A form of, the sprint interval high intensity exercise is great for that too. But to me, we can't forget about the heart. We can't forget about the cardiac output. And we're not going to be targeting the cardiac output very much. Our heart's going to be forgetting about working hard. And so to me, I think you want to balance that weight exercise again in the context of optimizing your human performance and longevity. I think you want to be hitting some short intervals or something in between there, in that sort of if you have that 20 to 30 minute sort of break in between, where you might be able to fit that.
Awesome. Can we transition into a little bit of I'm hoping it's a myth buster, but one of the common, just given my background in CrossFit, I think you know where I'm going with this, but one of the common experiences that I had, at least, or used to have in CrossFit, it appears to be getting better, was you would go to the gym, you'd work out so hard that you're going to throw up in a trash can, or whatever. Is that beneficial for people to work so hard that they're in pain for 3 days later?
No, I mean, I think that's just common sense wins on that argument. I think we have to, but I know that unfortunately that's the reputation that a lot of CrossFit gyms have kind of come into, and I think they are probably getting better and realizing that it can be done a better way. But yeah, that's not, if you're part of one that's still promoting that, you might want to shop elsewhere, or yeah, because that in essence is almost where we began with this, with that remember the neuromuscular musculoskeletal system, the soreness that you get, the shakiness that you might get from a HIIT session. We've got to balance that. And if we're hitting that all the time, you run into injury and illness.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's a bunch of different, we just can't sustain that type of workout for too long. At least, you can work up to, look at the CrossFit Games. Those are the guys that have been able to kind of work up to almost, reaching that level. They're so resilient,
Mm-hmm.
but it just doesn't, if you're just off the street and you know yourself that you haven't done that kind of effort for a long time, you've got to take a more common sense approach and have, don't go to the well every time, pull back on the no pain, no gain, philosophy that's out there. And so that you can kind of repeat that the next day with something else. And that's one of the key things. Like, again, I was mentioning to you, I train a lot of, elite, Olympic, and professional athletes. And one of the key things that we see, and this is across my experience with New Zealand Olympic program, we did studies where the key aspect was the consistency of training. Mm-hmm. So again, we can even in the superhuman context that we're trying to get the most out of our life, we can take that same philosophy and try to think of, well, what can I do now that I'm still going to be able to back up tomorrow, kind of thing, with the session. So consistency is key.
So with that, in terms of consistency, any sort of broad recommendations we can make? Said another way, I would like to just focus on the measurement. Like, how would you tell somebody to approximate frequency and to get consistency, and are there devices that you would need to accomplish that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a good old fashioned heart rate monitor, is like your standard Polar or a Garmin or whatever. Name your brand that's your favorite, are good little tools to use to approximate some intensity, at least on the aerobic context.
Mm-hmm.
If we're moving more towards the power lifter side, but that anaerobic context, it's really sort of more of a feel based sort of thing for the most part at the moment. There's no other real tools that I can suggest. Unfortunately, that's just the where we're at the moment. But my thinking is that wearables are going to get to that level in the future where they are going to be able to, tell us how much neuromuscular, musculoskeletal strain is actually going on inside, right? Like, so
mm-hmm.
wearable shirts that might measure EMG, for example, electromyography, sorry. And
do you mind just explaining electromyography for people who may not know it?
Sure. So basically, just whenever our muscles move, there's ultimately an electrical signal that's actually being created, and we can actually measure that electrical signal with a greater signal indicating a higher recruitment of more muscle fibers, and
mm-hmm.
a smaller signal, meaning it might just be very fine motor movement kind of thing. So it's related to the engagement of the muscle fibers. Remember, again, one of the key principles with HIIT, in the context of HIIT and weight training, we want to engage those larger motor units. So that's the general gist of EMG.
Mm-hmm. Is there any broad prescriptions, if you will, you can make around frequency? If consistency is key, how often should people be doing HIIT?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it always comes back to the context of the individual.
Yeah.
So there's no right or wrong rules. So again, spectrum. I reflect back on my time in the New Zealand Olympic program, and there were coaches of. I was at athletic coaching meetings where there's coaches of some of the world's best middle distance runners, and they would have HIIT, almost a form of HIIT session every day. So, but these guys, like, I think it was John Walker's program, he was backing it with these incredible, high intensity programs. kind of day in, day out, but he's built it up over so long. And then, but if we're looking at the context of an individual who's just beginning, like they are going to need some time to kind of recover. So there's just, sometimes multiple days. And so, yeah, there's no, but I guess as a general rule, maybe every 2 to 3 days you could have some form of a HIIT session. That would be pretty good. But again, remember, we're not talking about a no pain, no gain HIIT session. We're talking about something that is, something that you walk away from and you're like, oh, I feel pretty good after that session. And the stress is, you're not going to bed and then having problems sleeping. It's kind of so stressful. Like, it's not one of those ones. It's, almost sort of, it's just like, it's a good little stimulus. You feel good and you could back it up. So it's so context specific, and it so depends on what you mean when you're talking about a HIIT session. You can have the CrossFit session that you suggested, you were mentioning, but you could also have one that you walk away from, and you could actually repeat that one the next day. So sorry to kind of say that it really does depend, but and I guess also from the optimization standpoint, the higher the frequency, almost in most contexts, if it is low stress HIIT, the better. Like we were meant as humans to move. Like that's part of what we're all, we were put on this planet, and a number of years were put into developing the genetic blueprint to do exercise and recover from it. So our DNA is very well and truly used to that. We just have to kind of remind it, but not overstressed.
You mentioned the word stress, and so we have a number of different people listening to this who do experience some aspects of stress in a lot of parts of their life, including work, etc. What's the impact of doing too much HIIT?
Yeah, for sure. So the impact of doing too much HIIT really comes down to the stressing of our, you probably heard of our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or
HPA, my favorite one.
Yeah, so it's a great little axis that is useful for our survival, right? It's dictating the stress response, and it's in the context we were talking about where it's optimal, it's fantastic. Unfortunately, in situations where there is too much stress, and stress can come in so many different forms, right? From mental, emotional, social, from, heat, you name it. There's just, and exercise, of course, is another big one. So if there is too much of these stress points that are, all targeting in on the HPA axis, you're going to start spilling out too much cortisol, and the system really manifests into that thing that we hear of called overtraining syndrome. So however you want to call it, you can have an overtraining or an overworking or an over stressing syndrome. It doesn't really matter, whatever context you want. And again, back to the Olympic context, for me, we'd always call it overtraining syndrome, where an athlete's getting maybe too much HIIT without enough recovery. But for the average daily worker, they might be getting too much stress in other aspects of their life, and then they're throwing another a HIIT session that's just inappropriate or too frequent into the situation. Maybe that sprint interval training one, day in and day out. It's going to cause for some problems, and basically an HPA axis that's just in that alarm response, and it's continuing to spill out the cortisol. And it's probably, we know all of the various different things that we see. We see a suppressed HRV. We see we see a poor sleep, and then it's, you're not, I guess the system's ultimately trying to put you on your ass ultimately so that you'll one day stop and recover. But where it's throwing us on is, I can't, is in bed, I guess. It's trying to do that.
So monitoring things like HRV, since we did get introduced through Jason Moore, are incredibly valuable when it comes to a day-to-day training regimen.
Oh, fully. Absolutely. So all my athletes are on HRV. So, And we use the Elite HRV system. There's another good one we use called the HRV for Training. It actually measures your HRV on your phone, just using the camera lens. So it's kind of bread and butter for us on the HRV. Absolutely. So it's, and the cool thing about it, as Jason would have told you, is you can just measure it. You can almost standardize the measurement as soon as you wake up in the morning, right? For 1 to 2 minutes, very simple. And you're getting an overall indicator of what impact the overall stress of yesterday had on your and your ability to recover through the night had on where you're sort of sitting and your readiness ultimately to perform on that day. And we can, it's what we've sort of found is that it's not, we don't like to make knee-jerk reactions on one low reading per se in a lot of our athletes. But if we're seeing a trend where there's multiple days where HRV is down, well, it's a really good indicator for us to say something's wrong here, and we need to recover more. We need to put more recovery sort of interventions in place to get you recovered out the other side.
This is interesting because as a person who looks at their HRV every morning and kind of utilizes it in a way to kind of pick my max lift days, one day, basically I'm looking for guidance. Is one day mismeasurement, if you will, worth putting a lot of weight on, or it sounds like I should be looking at a broader trend?
You got it. You answered the question there. It's again, we don't do knee-jerk reaction on a single low measurement. We and this is why, again, the analytics that Jason in his app and Marco in his HRV for Training app, they have in there. We're looking for sort of trends in the marker over a number of different days, right? Like a 4-day running average, or even we can do a 7-day running average. But they have those sort of built in so that you can kind of see, how you're sort of looking on a overall sort of basis. And you can even look at the analysis as well yourself and actually have a look at the trends. Are you trending upwards, which we see in more of the aerobics phase, which is telling us that we're adapting, or in the overtraining sort of situation, we might see, at least acutely, we might see a trend of a number of readings that are falling downward towards the sympathetic sort of side, fight or flight response.
Can we transition a little bit into practical applications and sort of tips for people? Specifically, Sure. Do you mind explaining the 5 HIIT weapons?
Yeah, for sure. So we've spoken about the types, and now I guess in the HIIT science philosophy, and again, the context for that is the optimization of the performance for a lot of athletes. We've kind of broken down HIIT into 5 key weapons that you can use to hit those targets. And the first would be called like a long interval. This would be analogous to a VO2 set. So your Ironman or your cyclist guys that are out there that are listening to this, they'd know what a VO2 set is. You know, a VO2 set that's long. So these are like 2 to 4 minutes with 2 to 3 minutes of recovery between, say, for example. And you finish one of these HIIT sessions, and they're really apparent because the breathing level is really high, right? That's so you're breathing really heavy. That's the long interval. Short interval is that one that we spoke about with the 30 on, 30 off, say, for example. And these can get down as short as 10 on, 10 off. it's the most versatile of all of our different weapons. Okay, because we can hit all these various different targets. Extremely useful in the team sport context, because we can have it just hitting these aerobic stimuluses and not hitting the anaerobic and the neuromuscular system.
Mm-hmm.
Third weapon is our repeated sprint training. Now we're kind of moving into the all out forms of HIIT.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be like 4 seconds to 15 seconds all out, with similar kind of recovery levels, or maybe up to 30 seconds to a minute of recovery between. And then the sprint interval training, or these are the ones, I guess the Tabata type, 20 to 30 seconds all out. These are the ones that have we spoke about too, and again, can be used in that 20-minute context to get as much as you can out of a session. And then the final weapon is the one that's used in team sports. It's called game-based high-intensity interval training. It has a game-based kind of element to it, and like a small-sided games. So, I'm coaching I'm coaching my daughter's soccer team right now, and I'd use a small-sided game because it's I can actually get a HIIT stimulus, but at the same time it's fun, and it takes the any burden out of actually. Some people have they have a negative connotation when they think about exercise, but if they're playing with a sport implement in it, like a ball, then it's kind of fun. So those are the 5 key weapons that we have and that we speak about within HIIT Science.
Beautiful. And within, I guess, within kind of working this into a busy executive's life, one of the beautiful things about HIIT is you can do it in a relatively short time constraint. Do you have any guidance for people listening in terms of if they wake up in a particular day, or some sort of evaluation points that they should make in order to determine whether or not they should go with a HIIT training session for the day? Like, for instance, if sleep is off, or if something is off, or things that they should look to say, I should go out and train today.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think I'm a human like yourself. So it's, this is what I do basically. So if I've got a HIIT session that's kind of planned, and I have a poor sleep, I'm stressed, and things just aren't lining up where I feel like I want to do that HIIT session. And so I'll switch that to an aerobic stimulus, and you almost kind of know that yourself if you might feel really sort of sleepy a little bit, and where you don't really feel like you can kind of dig deep into those big motor units, imagine the powerlift type scenario. So in that sort of situation, I would just be doing I switch it to an aerobic session. But I'm kind of in a fortunate situation where I might have a little bit more time to do that. But that is what I do. So, again, in the busy executive context, you might just want to start with like an aerobic warm-up. And after you've reached your level of warm-up, you're moving your muscles, give 1 or 2 small efforts or short efforts a try, even 15, 20 seconds, just like, and not to the well, but maybe, just above that threshold. How does that feel? Are you still feeling tired? Well, then kill it, or just continue at aerobic. But sometimes you actually, you warm up and you're into it, and you can get through that workout. So those would be my general recommendations.
Beautiful. Paul, this has been extremely informative. Now I want to transition into a little bit of our final 4 questions, which I get to ask everybody. And this is going to be exciting. So let's get started with just sort of, what is one area where you think people should pay more attention to, or where people aren't paying enough attention to when it comes to performance?
Yeah, there's, I think probably the big one, it's making the rounds right now. If Matt Walker, wrote the book, why we sleep. And it has to be, to me, it's sleep. I think I listened to a great podcast you did the other day on sleep as well. And I think it's really kind of coming to light that we missed the boat on that one, and we really need to work towards optimizing sleep. It's as Matt Walker says, it's like the Swiss Army knife of all your different tools and interventions. It just figures out everything for you if you can get it right. So it's one of the, for me personally, it's the one that I'm working on. But yeah, just to try to maximize your sleep, and try to get that 8 hours if you can of quality sleep. It's not easy. I think a lot of us are, in that sort of situation where we're glued to everything has our attention in terms of our devices and our life and whatnot around us.
Mm-hmm.
But sleep sleep can really cure a lot of those things. And that would be the big one for me. And of course there's all the other ones that are following that one too, right?
Absolutely. There's plenty of others. What's your top trick for enhancing focus?
Would be meditation for sure. So that's the best thing I ever did was find Sam Harris and his course on Waking Up course. That's just been amazing for helping my focus.
We have a guy coming on the podcast very soon who got me sold on Sam Harris as well, just because of his hyper rational explanations for everything. I quite enjoy him. Did you start with so Sam Harris is Vipassana. Did you start predominantly with Vipassana, or have you experimented with other forms of meditation as well?
I would say, I'm not really aware of all the different types. I don't, I'm not, I don't have all of the lingos, but whatever Sam's doing is really helping me. So I think what was the other, there was another app that I used, Headspace. I used that one for a bit. And then, but yeah, for me personally, Sam Harris just really beat that one, hands down.
Likewise. What's your, what book has significantly impacted your life and or how you show up to perform in it?
Yes, I will. I'll give you three very briefly, and in the order that I read them. I guess as a younger gentleman with a chip on his shoulder, and needing to get things sort of figured out, it was Anthony Robbins' "Awaken the Giant Within," and it just really, I guess, taught me how to become a little bit more confident and to gain some focus. And then Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week was also instrumental in giving me a few tricks in how I could cheat the system ultimately to get ahead in life. And
what were some of your key takeaways from that? I always, when people bring that book up, I have to, because I remember reading that book at a particular time in my life, and I'm always curious what you took out of it.
Well, it was, I guess some of the key ones was just how you don't have to almost go the status quo kind of thing in terms of, it does, you can find a way to do things a lot quicker. Just because a degree, say, for example, has to be done in 4 years, or because a university says that, it's not actually necessarily the case. So you can find a way around, doing, extra courses around it, or, figuring out a way to, take the final exam to get credit for the courses. So it's I guess it's just taking that extra step to, just because something because life puts in front of you that it has to be a certain way, question whether it really does or not. And I think I just use that general principle. There's so many that are in there, but that would be one of the one. I think, it's just learn the system so that you can find a way to cheat it.
Yeah.
Is ultimately what I took from that one. But for right or wrong, it sounds bad, but it's a good principle, I think.
May title the episode that, but You were going to mention one more book, and I cut you off.
Yes. And again, we've kind of covered it, but Sam Harris is Waking Up as well.
Mm-hmm.
The book and course are just fantastic for me. Again, in terms of focusing and understanding the things that matter, and and just giving you the mental focus to keep on task.
Excellent. Paul, this has been an absolute pleasure. Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, so I do have a Twitter account. It's Paul B. Laursen, and our HIIT Science account is very active as well. So that's at HIIT Science, 2 I's in HIIT, science, one word. And so we're HIITscience.com. And I'm also a coach of endurance athletes at PlusandProf.com. My mate Dan Plus and I run a coaching business for endurance athletes at Plus and Prof. So all of those sort of places you can reach me, and I would love to hear from you.
Excellent. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show.
My pleasure, Boomer. Thanks for having me.
Superhumans, a couple of things before you leave. If you're enjoying these episodes, if you're enjoying the guests that you're hearing, can you head on over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating? It really helps us get the word out about what we're doing here at Decoding Superhuman. Second, feedback. If you have direct feedback for us, whether you like or didn't like something, feel free to send it to podcast@decodingsuperhuman.com. For those of you who have taken advantage of that, you know that I respond to each and every one of those mails. And then finally, would you like 300 to 500 words of highly curated information on how to upgrade performance? If so, head on over to decodingsuperhuman.com/throwdown, and you'll get our next issue of the Throwdown, which is our 300 to 500 word highly curated digest, if you will, on what's going on in the field of performance. Enjoy your day, Superhumans, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in to today's episode.